I'll swallow your androgynous soul. Welcome, huge movie fanatic Nate, stopping on by. This time I'm coming at you. Didn't know if I'd ever really see this. I mean, I figured I'd see this at some point. Coming at you to review the latest Evil Dead quote-unquote film, or I don't imagine it was shot on film. Latest quote-unquote Evil Dead digital that has come out. Basically, I don't know, was this like 10 or 11 years after the last Evil Dead film, which was the Evil Dead remake? Feel free to check out that review that on this channel that came out years, probably 10 years ago. My thoughts on the Evil Dead remake. That is watchable, obviously, on this channel. This video is coming at you basically courtesy Keith. Keith, a buddy of mine, was very gracious and basically made me be able to see this, or allowed me to be able to see this movie for free, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you very much. Having seen it and now thinking about it, I'm very glad it was free. Coming at you to basically review Evil Dead Rise. Basically, years ago or whatever, maybe it was last year, whenever I heard about this movie for the very first time, my understanding at the time was that this was going to be something that was going to go straight to streaming. I think this was going to be, at the time, the HBO, the thing was called HBO Max at the time last year, and from what I can remember reading at the time when this was in production or post-production, this was slated for direct to streaming, and somewhere along the line, I guess they decided to put it in theaters. And I mean, it doesn't really matter, but that's my recollection. I could be wrong, but needless to say, it did end up coming out in the theaters. I haven't seen a movie since December of 2022 when I did Avatar 2: Teal Wet People in the theater with Beth. So needless to say, I haven't seen this in the theater, or wouldn't have seen it in the theater. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I gave the Evil Dead remake 2 stars out of 4 stars back then, and a lot of that, if I can briefly talk about that, a lot of that was just due to the fact that, I mean, you can't, I couldn't, as much as I kind of wanted to hate the remake, the fact that they actually did it in the woods was a big plus for me being a woods enthusiast and a great outdoors enthusiast and a cabin in the woods kind of enthusiast and stuff. You got to give them props for when they did the remake of Evil Dead, it actually being in the cabin. Wasn't thrilled about the reasons for the characters being in the cabin and this and that. Feel free to check out the review of the Evil Dead remake on this channel if you want to know more about how I feel about that. But cut to this movie. Obviously, if you know anything about me, I'm far from a urban enthusiast. I don't. That's one of the reasons. Although I own the Saw movies, I'm not a big fan of the Saw movies. Is it's just all urban. It's just buildings, walls, bathrooms, just grungy, dingy, just man-made shite, if you will. And much more fan of the Evil Dead films when they're in the cabin in the woods. And that actually is something that I did want to mention before I really get into the nitty and gritty of the review, is I did want to mention that I've been an Evil Dead fan since the late 80s. A buddy of mine introduced me to Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. Back then, I mean, Evil Dead 2 was really new on home video, and I think I was probably introduced to it sometime in 1989. And been an Evil Dead fan since probably 1989. Saw Army of Darkness in the theater in its initial theatrical run. I think it was January or February of 1993, 30 glorious years ago. Did see Army of Darkness in the theater with Jess, his brother Jason, Keith. My mom took all of us. Thank you very much, Mom. That was quite the treat at the time to see Army of Darkness in the original theatrical run. So needless to say, I'm not just one of these Evil Dead fans who materialized in the early 2000s or something when these were starting to be released on Anchor Bay DVD and stuff. I've been an Evil Dead fan since the 80s, and it's painful to see the series devolve over the course of the decades. Like, in my opinion, the first film is the best, second film second best, third film third best. Like, everything kind of just gets worse. Although I'd say that, although I haven't seen the entire series, I've seen the first season of Ash vs. Evil Dead. I prefer that more than the remakes. So, but if we're talking about just films, the movies just get worse for me as they go on. For me, the Evil Dead remake was something that was doable, but still by then it was 2000, whatever it was, 12 or whatever it was. And by then it's, we're talking CG gore and just kind of this same thing with, I'm not a big fan of like Asian horror and like so much of the Sam Raimi executive produced stuff, going back to The Grudge and things and Boogeyman and, back up to the Evil Dead remake. So much of it, in my opinion, was like, has this, whether it's intended or not intended, I see it as, I can't help but shake this Japanese, Japanese horror influence that's present in a lot of the Ghost House stuff, Sam Raimi executive produced stuff for the 21st century. Same thing here with Evil Dead Rise. Basically, and I'm trying to, in case you haven't seen the movie, I don't want to spoil much of it, so it's going to be one of these shorter reviews, hopefully. I'm not going to dabble too much on plot points. Of course, the next thing I go on to do is start talking about the plot points. But one thing I will say is I actually enjoyed the first part of the movie up until the title sequence, where very epically the title Evil Dead Rise is revealed. And I'm not going to spoil, I'll try not to spoil anything just for the sake of saving time as well, but I actually enjoyed the movie up until that point. I thought it was I just wish the whole movie could have, I'll just simply say without spoiling anything, I just wish the whole movie could have taken place in that location that the beginning of the movie takes place in, up until the epic, title reveal, and the Evil Dead Rise title quite literally rises up onto the screen. I thought the movie up until that point was great, and basically just devolves instantly after that. It was a little bit of a bummer. Cut to some high-rise building. I guess this movie was shot in New Zealand, and one can only assume it was cheaper to shoot there than in America. I don't see how that's possible or whatever, but whatever. This movie, I guess, was shot in New Zealand, if memory serves, if I'm not completely and totally incorrect. Basically, cut to this. Well, I guess the first scene is with introducing this character, who I guess is just recently groupie character, that she's always referred to as a groupie, and someone who does something to do with bands on tour or whatever, and she just recently, in this nasty Saw-esque bathroom, she in this nasty environment, is finding out that she's pregnant, and we go on to learn that she's the sister of this main character, who has 3 lovely daughters by the name of Cassie, Bridget, and Dan. I don't remember if the father, I would assume the father's an asshole, because that's another thing I wanted to talk about very briefly in this review, is this movie has is evidence with the male character, the first male character you see in this movie. This movie has one could say it has a slight, maybe more than a slight tinge of, the classic, what can be found in so many movies these days, as the whatever you want to call it, male hate or anti-male sentiment, sprinkled into the movie. That's definitely a thing going on here, although not all the male characters are assholes. Obviously, there's it's not obvious, but there's a couple of, I think there's one male character who's not portrayed as an asshole, as being helpful or a nice guy or something. But basically, this movie follows the premise with single mom, 3 daughters, and this situation where the sister, is it little sister, one would assume, shows up and hasn't been there for a while or whatever, and I guess there's an earthquake and it makes a hole in the basement, a hole in something, and when the daughters go and find it's basically more or less Evil Dead, another Evil Dead remake, except for in the cabin in the woods, it's in a frickin' apartment building in the city. Ooh boy, big deal. I mean, the whole half or more of the greatness, in my opinion, of Evil Dead, the original movie, is that just the locale that it's located in, and just that cool, and cool element to those early films, and how that helps accentuate the whole horror aspect, and just the loneliness, the loneliness. The loneliness isn't the right word, but the whatever, we're cut off from civilization or whatever. This movie attempts to, make them trapped or whatever by other means, just kind of more the power goes out and the elevator doesn't work. I can't remember if that explains why they can't simply go down the stairs and get the fuck out of the building, but what basically goes on to happen is they discover this, the Book of the Dead, and I can't remember if this is how the book looked in the remake or not, with the teeth that are on the side. I mean, take it or leave it. I'm much more interested in the original, design, with more or less the face on the cover. There's no face to be seen, or at least no, evident face to be seen on this new Book of the Dead or whatever. And if one listens to the voice on the record, and one of which I guess is supposed to be Bruce Campbell, although I wouldn't, there's no way I'd recognize that if I wasn't told, there's no way I'd recognize that. And the only way we know it's him, if it really is that it's just internet or credits in the movie or whatever. But yeah, Bruce Campbell's purported to be the voice of the priest or whatever. You can't really, or at least I can't really tell that. But what ends up happening is, what I was getting at before is, I guess this might be one of, what did they say, 3 books or whatever. So I guess one way we can explain away the fact that this doesn't look like books from the earlier films or whatever is because it's not the book from the earlier films. It's another Necronomicon. So that's why it doesn't look like them from, the ones with the faces from the earlier films. But the daughters find this stuff, a Necronomicon, and some records, and after there's an earthquake and it opens up this hole, and they're able to find this building. I guess was back in the older days, was originally a bank. So they find, I don't know if they find if they're able to access the vault after the earthquake, or the vault after the earthquake. Regardless, after the earthquake, they're able to access an area that they're able to find the Necronomicon and these records. Ancient recordings from, listen to me, ancient from the 1930s, but I guess it is almost 100 years after that. But these recordings, these record recordings of stuff going on where they're reciting passages or whatever, obviously a wink back to the original film, and the reel-to-reel tape recorder and tapes that's played back. Honestly, the things that I do like the best about this movie is the way that, the scene, because up until, I don't know, maybe I was on board more or less with the movie maybe for the first maybe 20 minutes or so, and when she started playing the records and the way they do it, because this main character, this main, one of the main daughters is like a DJ enthusiast, of course, and she's conveniently got a turntable. And there's one thing that I find interesting about this movie, this is just happens to come out during this era where, at your local Target store, basically compact discs of music and DVDs and Blu-rays and 4Ks of movies are being phased out, while they're making room for the vinyl records to come in to explode onto the shelves. It's just like, okay, well, it's not an accident that the means of getting the information and unleashing the evil in this movie is by basically by a vinyl record and turntable situation. And we have to show early on that the daughter is a DJ enthusiast, so she's conveniently got means to. I mean, 10 years ago, no one would ever be able to listen to these discovered records. 10 or 15 years ago, no one would have the means to listen to these discovered records in the basement. You'd have no movie, everything would be fine. Well, the sister is still pregnant, so maybe not everything would be fine, but most things. So I will say the scene where she turns on the record and the way they show the speakers and, the sound coming from the speakers and the way the sound is, and it's like the classic kind of some of the Evil Dead verbiage of, Kanda and all that stuff obviously invokes, being a fan of the series from, 1989, being a kid and all through teen years and into adulthood and stuff, hearing Kanda obviously brings back memories of, fun days of old and watching the original movies and things, and the way they show the speakers vibrate and this kind of stuff, and the record and the needle on the record, and, that stuff was done relatively well. And, I guess maybe the first 20 or 25 minutes I was more or less kind of on board with the movie. Once again, I really, really liked the opening scene the most, and pretty much everything after that is not so completely amazing. Cut to once Mom's possessed. I think I can say that without that being a big spoiler. I mean, mom gets possessed, is the first one to get possessed, and you know, there's a lot of you know, gross stuff. I'm not a big how do you say it? Is it regurgitation? Is that the term? I'm not a big regurgitation enthusiast, so seeing this like CG, assuming, you know, one can only assume it's, you know, CG regurgitation, and it happens like more than once too. This just like, you know, just fountain of whatever it is, blood, bile, goo, just whatever coming out of mom's mouth. Someone else does it. It happens at least twice, because I remember being like, I made it through the first one, you know, by just covering up most of my eyes and being like, okay, you know, that's like, okay, it's done. And then, you know, only to have it happen later on with possibly a different character, whatever. Basically, I think pretty much all I'll say regarding the rest of the movie is just, yeah, it's just not interesting to me. I mean, it just, you know, it's like, it's just sad to see, and you know, this is what happens with you know, or I guess I should say, in my opinion, with movies and stuff as the decades go on. It's sad to see Evil Dead's humble beginning, 16 millimeter, low budget film, just shot off in the woods, just with these enthusiastic young fellows doing this movie, and fellows and gals doing this movie, and just seeing decades later. What's ironic is with all the means, with all the money and the means, and now it's like an A movie, it's an A release, released in, you know, worldwide theatrically. You've just got this just cookie cutter, just digital, you know, plenty of digital gore. I mean, if there's real gore there, you can't tell, because, I mean, everything looks digital anyway, presumably mostly digital gore. It's just cookie cutter shit that doesn't really stand apart from what else is being released now. And, you know, the original Evil Dead being my favorite of the films, it stands apart from other movies from the time, and just times that have come since. I mean, it's a unique piece of work, and the whole joy of it, in my opinion, or one of the joys of the original film, and I guess to some extent the second and third films, but mostly the first for me, is just to watch it, and to know that all of that on-screen mayhem is there. It was shot, it was real, well, it wasn't real, but it was happening, you know, on the set. It was happening before the camera, and, you know, and some of that special animation and optical effects where they blended live action with animation, and all this kind of just really cool camera trickery. I mean, I guess one could say that CG is just the modern day version of camera trickery, but I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, it's, to me, you know, I'm not the biggest fan of like just these days 21st century movies just, you know, just defaulting to CG to solve problems, and, you know, taking the lazy CG route, and this kind of stuff and that kind of stuff. And, you know, I always go back to that one shot from Terminator 3 when the sexy Terminator materializes, you know, into the present day, whatever it is, 2003 at the time, and we see, you know, before she arrives, we see like this department store, you know, window or whatever, and this mannequin start on fire. Instead of having it start on fire for real, I think it'd be cheaper to just, you know, to blast a real one and having it melt for real. They have this CG animation of this mannequin melting, and it's just like, I don't understand, you know, like why you can't just, you know, torch an actual mannequin and you think it'd be cheaper and have a mannequin melt for real. It'd not only be, I would assume, cheaper to do, quicker to do, but it'd actually, hey, how's this for an idea? It'd look real. And I just, you know, let's face it, it's probably in large part due to my age and just the generation I come from and stuff, but let's face it, I mean, the more and more movies just look digital and default to digital CG technology to do things, even you know, if I can bitch for just a few more seconds, even things like they used to do in the old days where they actually used to just attach cameras to cars, and now they'll just default to green screen because it's easier, and you just people driving in cars, you know, it's fake ass shit these days. Not always, but I'd say, you know, a good amount of time or whatever. I mean, I don't see a whole lot of movies, new movies anyway, so it's not really an issue. But every time someone just like gets lazy and does something CG, it's just like, ugh. But obviously we know the characters that are going to survive. So to me the characters that I knew were going to survive, you don't have to really worry when they're in peril throughout the movie because they're going to survive. Just like with the Evil Dead, let's face it, it's a staple. Not so much with Army of Darkness, I don't think, but it's a staple with like the first two couple films and then the remake of having the main character and or characters completely caked in blood by the time the movie's over. And obviously this movie follows the same trope, and it does beg the question, like if some of these characters were getting infected with blood or whatever, like how these two characters can be covered in blood at the end and not get infected themselves. I mean, surely some of that had to go in your nose, in your mouth, in your ear, in your eyes, something if you're completely caked in it. But I digress. And of course there's like this, just very conveniently at the bottom in the parking area of the apartment building, there's like, I don't know why it'd even be there in the city, but that's just another fakery of this movie. But there's like a wood chipper, and the chainsaw becomes very easily accessible. And just like with the Evil Dead remake, the female character just defeats this. Oh God, I even forgot to mention that there's a handful of characters that get possessed throughout the course of this movie, and they kind of end up like very much like the John Carpenter The Thing, or the prequel that would come out. It's like these characters end up getting all like combined physically together, and it's like one big monster. And it's just kind of like, I guess one could say, well, that's different for the Evil Dead canon or Evil Dead films or whatever, but it's just like, seen it before, again, probably CG creation or whatever, or CG enhanced creation. And it's very akin to, as I said, the John Carpenter Thing universe. And it's just like, yeah, okay, I mean, whatever. I mean, it's just, call it my age, call it my generation, just, whatever, be call it whatever, or just having taste, call it whatever you will. I mean, so much of this movie was just like, oh my God, give me a frickin' break. I mean, even when the chainsaw got started and it's just like bloodshed, it's just like, just the funnel of blood and, just whatever and stuff. So, and also I don't understand why the movie did what it did, where it's like the very beginning, the first scene that I actually like, it's like this, then that scene's over, then it says the day before, and then at the end of this movie you see the character, from the beginning, like just, oh, we're excited about doing this other thing. I don't know why start it like that or whatever, like why even do that? Maybe it tested poorly, I can't imagine why, and they decided to possibly do that beginning scene after one of the many poor test screenings or something. It's possible. Because like I say, if they just would have done the whole movie like the beginning was, I probably would like it much more, just for the environment it takes place in. So my star rating for Evil Dead Rise, I gotta tell you, the 2/3 of it, the last 2/3, I really have a hard time getting through, honestly. Just garbly-gook nonsense. I think as high as I can go with this movie is, I guess I can go as high as 3/4 of 1 star out of 4 stars. So that's not even 1 star, it's 3/4 star out of 4 stars for Evil Dead Rise. And that's only because that initial scene I liked, and I did like the record thing and the conda and the way the speakers are vibrating and stuff. But other than that, this is just a bunch of uninspired, in my opinion, just lackluster 21st century overproduced just CG bullshit. And it doesn't help that some of the more current, whatever you want to say, how can I say this without getting in trouble, I guess current kind of mindset regarding youth, I guess we'll simply say, youth and their I guess confused state, I guess that's a good way to say it, the little bit of subtle portrayal of the confused state of the youth in this 2020s era being portrayed on screen very you know, whatever, subtly or whatever, you know, me having, it's so funny, it's so unfortunate how, like, I don't know, just what they're doing in the world is forcing people who weren't, like myself, who weren't what you'd call political. Like, you know, I still don't call myself political, but it's almost like they force you, you know, the more they put things out into the world and screw up the world, they force you to, like, take a side. And it's like, I was always a person who, like, didn't necessarily take a side on stuff. I just stayed out of things. But, you know, they just keep changing shit and fucking shit up where I'm like, you know, you're forced to take a side. And anyway, you know, that element of this movie was not appreciated, obviously, either. And it was just like, whatever. And I guess that's pretty much my review of Evil Dead Rise. Yeah. Thanks very much, Keith, for you know, allowing me to, or for enabling me to see this without me having to actually pay for it. I very much appreciated. Thank you very much. Don't think I'll be ever, well, unless it's like $3 on Blu-ray or something, clearance at Half Price Books. I don't expect I'll ever end this, or I'll ever add this to the catalog. I get $3 Blu-ray. I probably would, but probably watch it once, or the first couple minutes once, and put it on the shelf. But yeah, it's just, in closing, it's just a bummer to see how things devolve over time. And I want to say there's a video on YouTube of some fan, like, berating, like, the panel at a Q&A, like, after. I didn't watch it, you know, but I think there's a, you know, video or videos on YouTube of some fan berating Bruce Campbell and possibly Sam Raimi and whoever's on the panel Q&A after this, just, you know, just trashing this movie, and rightfully so, you know. And of course they're like poo-pooing him and you know, whatever. But I mean, that would be me, you know. It's just like, you know, how far you guys have deteriorated since the great, you know, the great years of old, of the 80s. You know, I mean, not even necessarily saying 90s, because I mean, I don't think, for me, Army of Darkness doesn't hold a candle to the first film, or even the second film. I mean, I like the I don't even like the second one as much these days. I like that much more when I was younger, but, you know, once I got out of my teens and 20s and stuff, like, the second one is just a little too, you know, slapstick. But for me, the first film is, I still hold it in really, really high regard. So, in closing, it's just a shame to see where Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, Rob Tapert, you know, they've just been, you know, much like some of the characters absorb into each other to become this super monster. Like, they've just been, over the decades of being in the business, they've just been absorbed by the monster that is, you know, whatever, the Hollywood movie system or the mainstream movie system. And just, granted, I'm thankful that they don't put out Evil Dead movies very often, but, you know, when they do put them out, in my opinion, they just get worse and worse, and less creative. But I guess I've said my piece on the movie. If you guys watched all the way to the end, thank you very much for doing so. Hope you guys enjoyed the review, and as always, we'll catch you on the next video.